Good afternoon. At the outset, let me once again thank our signer, Lydia Callis, for being with us today. I did want to bring, did you see Saturday Night Live?
I did.
Thought so. I want to bring you up to date on today's nor'easter as well as the city's continuing hurricane recovery. Because of today's storm, coastal areas in our city face a risk of some flooding until 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. And the National Weather Service warns that there could be some major flooding in spots already eroded by Sandy. The difference here is that the barriers of sand or rock that were there before perhaps are not there. So far, we've not had any reports of flooding today, and we are through the first and most dangerous cycle of high tide. So if we got through this, we probably will get through the next one, which comes at something like 1 in the morning. We are also under a high wind warning through 4 a.m. tomorrow. The winds will blow at 25 to 40 miles an hour, with gusts tonight reaching 60 miles an hour or higher. The storm will involve a wintry mix of rain and snow. Anybody that's been outside understands that. Through the rest of this evening and ending with rain tomorrow morning. Although big accumulations of snow are unlikely, streets are going to be slick, sloppy, and visibility will be reduced. There is a band over Nassau right now of snow. The weather forecasters say that their original forecast, 1 to 3 inches of wet, slushy stuff at the very worst stands, and they don't think it's going to be any more than that. But with that in mind, please don't drive if you can avoid it. Use mass transit instead. If you must drive, exercise extreme caution. Now, it is a good idea to stay indoors with this because Hurricane Sandy weakened trees, and the high winds tonight could cause more trees and limbs to come down, and the storm debris still on our streets to blow around dangerously. We'll also have unseasonably cold temperatures tonight, unfortunately. They'll drop into the mid-30s, and the high winds will make it feel as if it's in the mid-20s. In the face of these weather conditions, we've taken a number of steps to protect New Yorkers, especially our most vulnerable New Yorkers. Last night, we ordered the evacuation of 4 chronic care facilities on the Rockaways, 3 nursing homes with a total of more than 450 residents, and 1 adult care center with more than 170 residents. All 4 facilities are located in areas that were hard hit by Hurricane Sandy. And while since then they've been operating successfully with emergency generators, the city and state departments of health decided the threat of a loss of power during a new storm surge made it advisable to move their residents to a safer spot. This evacuation was completed very late last night. They were taken to other nursing homes and facilities that had space available. All the residents, I'm happy to say, were moved safely and are being taken care of. And I want to commend our emergency medical service personnel for their very smooth coordination of this event. A lot of the people were not happy that they had to move, but their safety is our first consideration. Because of the continued threat of flooding, as they did yesterday, police officers are making announcements over patrol car loudspeakers in spots that are close to the shoreline and most vulnerable to further flooding. They're doing that to encourage people who are elderly or homebound or who have infants to go someplace where they're certain to be safe and warm. Hundreds of volunteers, you should know, have braved some increasingly nasty weather to knock on doors in these communities today. And like the NYPD officers, they're letting people know about the city's shelters and how to get to them. All such centers have at least one entrance that is wheelchair accessible. The FDNY has also positioned additional ambulances and 20 special task forces outfitted with small inflatable boats, pumps, chainsaws, and other equipment near potential flood areas in Brooklyn, Queens, and on Staten Island. So we think we're ready for anything. We haven't and won't order the kind of large-scale evacuation that we did in advance of Hurricane Sandy. But if you are experiencing significant flooding during Sandy, you should consider taking shelter with friends and family at a safer spot or using one of the city's storm shelters. In particular, residents of Hamilton Beach, Garrison Beach, and Breezy Point should consider going someplace tonight to be a little bit on the safe side. This is for your safety and to deter any burglars. The NYPD will conduct conduct patrols in these areas and other areas, as well as on Staten Island. And for those who are still without heat anywhere in the city, remember this. If you're elderly or if you have an infant under a year old or have heart disease or other serious medical conditions, make sure that you are in a warm place. And if you find yourself shivering uncontrollably, or if you see someone else who is or who seems disoriented, those are symptoms of hypothermia. Hypothermia can be deadly. Anyone with those symptoms needs to get to a warm place very quickly. It would be great if you could look in on your neighbors tonight, especially those who are elderly, to see if they need help. I stopped yesterday to visit an old friend in the Rockaways. At their house, their basement was flooded. Fortunately, it did not go up to the first floor. They were safe, but 2 doors away, an elderly gentleman wasn't so lucky, and he died apparently. Since Saturday, the city has provided buses that can take you to a shelter where you can spend the night safe and warm. There are also more than 200 centers where people can go to stay warm during the day. We just opened a new warming center yesterday at 110th West 9th Street in Red Hook, and it will be open until midnight. We've also taken some other measures to prepare for this new storm. The city's parks and beaches closed today at noon and will remain closed until noon tomorrow. All exterior construction work was suspended at noon today, and all construction sites were ordered to be secured, and this will remain in effect until the storm passes. Now, while this storm is not as dangerous as Sandy was, New Yorkers should still take safety precautions today and tonight. As I said earlier, avoid driving tonight. Clear roofs, balconies, yards, and outdoor spaces of anything that can be blown around. If you encounter any power lines that have been brought down, do not go near them. Call 311 to report down wires, and only use 911 for genuine emergencies. If you remain in your homes, please do not use gas ranges or ovens to stay warm. That is not only a serious fire hazard, the fumes released can kill you. If you lose your electric power or don't have it already lost it, be careful with candles. Don't leave them unattended, and certainly don't leave them burning if you go to sleep. And make sure that you have working flashlights and spare flashlight batteries on hand should your lights go out. Now, we're also continuing to make emergency help available to New Yorkers still suffering from the effects of Hurricane Sandy. Today, we distributed some 1,500 electric space heaters to people in Broad Channel and the Rockaways, excuse me, who've had their power restored, but who are still without heat in their homes. Our emergency food distribution efforts continued today, too, although the weather caused sites to close early. Over the past 6 days, our estimates are that NYC service volunteers, members of the National Guard, and staff of the Salvation Army have distributed something like 1.6 million prepared meals, almost 400,000 bottles of water, 86,000 blankets, and other critical supplies at the distribution sites that we've set up, and also by going door to door in affected communities. Until 4 p.m. today, food trucks parked at more than 20 locations in hard-hit areas in Queens, Brooklyn, and Staten Island will, as they did yesterday, give away free hot meals. This is a partnership sponsored by the Mayor's Fund to Advance New York City. Call 311 or go to nyc.gov to get the locations where the trucks will be. You should know that today the Mayor's Fund has collected more than $32 million for Sandy hurricane relief, and I wanted to thank everyone who's made donations to find out how to give. Call 311 and go to nyc.gov. I got in the mail today a check for $10, and I got a commitment of $2 million from somebody else. And while the $2 million is going to go a lot further, I suspect the guy that gave the 10 was just as generous, given his resources, as the person who was able to make a $2 million gift. It just shows you that New Yorkers really care, and we've had something like 10,000 different contributors to the Mayor's Fund. I also wanted to acknowledge Airbnb, which is an online service that matches people seeking temporary housing with people who have unused space. Today, they're launching a new platform for people displaced by Hurricane Sandy to link up with New Yorkers who want to offer free places for them to stay with no service fee. I think it's another great example of the private sector using technology to help address this emergency. Go to AIRBNB, one word, AIRBNB.com/Sandy to learn more. We are continuing to clear out flooded areas, remove debris, and restore electrical service, which are all essential to getting life in our hardest-hit communities back to normal. To speed up floodwater drainage, crews from the Department of Environmental Protection have cleared debris from some 2,400 catch basins during the past 7 days alone. That work is continuing. Debris removal is also going on around the clock. The Sanitation Department, with help from private contractors and federal and state agencies, has already cleared nearly 130,000 tons of storm debris. So they continue to focus on that. We've suspended street cleaning regulations citywide through next Monday, November 12th, which is Veterans Day. Residents of areas not hard hit by Sandy may see some disruptions in refuse pickup in their neighborhoods while this process continues. I've seen larger piles than normal of bags outside. We're all in this together, and we're trying to get the most serious areas cleaned up as fast as we can, and we will be around maybe a day or so later than normal, but we will be around to pick up the garbage in those areas that were not affected by the storm. On the subject of storm cleanup, I did want to thank Commissioner Jeanette Sedek-Khan and the City Department of Transportation for their hard work in this effort. From before the storm hit right through today, the men and women of DOT have kept roads and bridges clear for emergency responders and now are working to remove thousands of tons of storm debris. Mass transit continues to function well. I'm told both tubes now of the Holland Tunnel are now working. So on the Hudson River crossings, all three, the Holland, Lincoln, and GW Bridge, are working. I'm told there is a good expectation by maybe the end of the weekend of getting the Queens Midtown Tunnel back. But I can just tell you the cooperation that we've gotten from Governor Cuomo and his staff and from the MTA is nothing short of great. And they're doing everything, and because they took some prophylactic measures, they are able to restore service, mass transit, that if they hadn't taken those would not be possible to get going in any reasonable time frame. As to restoring electrical service, today some 66,000 electrical customers in our city remain without power. That's down from 91,000 at this time yesterday. It's still a very big number. But here's the perplexing thing, or the difficult thing. Out of that 66,000, some 30 to 40,000 of those customers, 50 to 75% of those customers, face a major hurdle to restoring electrical power and natural gas service, and that is their home and business wiring systems and power panels flooded and were covered with salt water. And we've got to get those cleaned and make sure that they are safe. If salt water is on the wires or the switches, circuit breakers, energizing those could easily start a fire, and that's the last thing we need. You have to have a qualified contractor to do the work, and in the past 48 hours, 40 teams of licensed electricians and plumbers, city workers, and representatives of utility companies have gone door to door in the Rockaways and the South Shore of Staten Island. They've inspected nearly 1,000 homes and found that roughly half need repair to their electrical and gas boiler systems. These homes are in areas where utility service hasn't yet been restored. And by identifying what needs to be done in individual buildings, we'll be able to get utilities turned back on more quickly once service is ready. What really happens here is if the utility, Con Ed or LIPA, can provide electricity on the street, that does not mean that they can turn on anybody on that street until they get into the house and make sure that the existing electrical apparatus has not been compromised by salt water. If they can't get in the house, they're going to have to cut the line to that house. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to turn on anybody in the street, and they can't turn on the street for people where they can get in until the repair work has been done. We're also continuing to make progress in restoring essential services in public housing. Yesterday, as a result of these efforts, 39 buildings housing 10,600 people got their heat and hot water restored, and that means that 70% of all buildings in public housing developments that were impacted by Sandy now have heat and hot water. Also yesterday, electricity was restored for 1,500 people in 6 public housing buildings, and that brings to 83% the buildings that lost power because of Sandy that now have their lights back on. So we still have 17% left to go for electricity and 30% left to go for heat and hot water. Thanks to emergency contracts NYCHA has made with electrical contractors, the agency has 5 times as many electricians, plumbers, and other members of the skilled trades on the ground working to restore power, heat, and hot water than they otherwise would have had. So we brought in the private sector to get this done as quickly as possible. In many buildings, especially in Coney Island, the Rockaways, and Red Hook, Sandy did severe damage to equipment. But in the days ahead, the temporary generators and boilers we're bringing in and the additional manpower that we're deploying will allow us to restore service to more and more public housing. I'm happy to say public schools resumed classes today. 1,728 schools were open, which is about 100 more than we had open on Monday. Some 20,000 students in 43 schools were relocated today because the buildings they were normally scheduled to attend classes in sustained damage from Sandy. We asked families and students to be patient as new school bus routes are worked out. All the schools in the buildings where shelters have been located will be open tomorrow, and that includes Brooklyn's John Jay High School campus. And I did want to thank the teachers, principals, and school custodians who've really done such fantastic work. The attendance for both students and the faculty is encouragingly high. And before taking questions, let me summarize for Spanish-speaking New Yorkers and give Lydia a break. Le pedimos a todos los neoyorquinos que tengan mucho cuidado en las calles hoy porque viene otra tormenta. Si su casa es inundado durante el huracán Sandy, busca un lugar más seguro hoy. La policía está en su comunidad para ayudar a todos a encontrar un lugar seguro para pasar la noche. And with that, we'll be happy to take a question or two. Yes, Miss.
Given the storm going on right now, do you have a sense of how much it is likely at this point to set back the recovery efforts?
You know, if no new trees come down, it doesn't make that worse. In some cases, trees will come down, though, in a storm like this, and they'll take down power lines that maybe weren't down before or come down again. It'll be relatively minor, but it's just more work for the utility companies. Some of the teams that we had out couldn't function in this kind of weather, so that slows it down a little bit. But our expectation is that tomorrow we'll be back working and it will not slow down. It, however, does make it much more uncomfortable and even dangerous for people who are in their homes, do not want to leave under any circumstances, and don't have electricity and or heat. When I had coffee in this house, the friend of mine in the Rockaways, I will say I sat with husband, wife, and daughter with my coat on, my collar up, and my hands holding the mug of coffee. It was really cold. They don't have any heat. And we joked about taking cold showers, but that's the only ways that they can refresh themselves, and hopefully they'll get it back. It's a street like all these other streets. They had damage done in their basement to the electric panel. They had a small generator, so they had electricity at least, but it was certainly not enough to drive a space heater or anything else. Yes, sir.
Do you have any refinement on the estimate of how many people may need temporary housing that Mr. Gare is working on?
Still trying to get a handle on it. I think part of the answer to your question is need or willing to take. An awful lot of the families whose houses were inundated, not destroyed, but inundated, so they don't have heat and hot water and electricity. Our experience with them so far is they are very unlikely to be willing to leave their houses. This is everything they worked for all their lives, and this is where they want to be. We've got to make sure that we provide blankets and security and all of those things so that they can do that. But the real question is how many people are going to be willing to leave. Now, if your house is going to fall down, you don't have much choice, although they might very well find somebody else to stay in. So we are out there trying to get as much housing as we can, finding hotel rooms or apartments or other public housing facilities that have space around in the region. At the same time, talking to FEMA about the possibility of using trailers. And we're exploring every single option. But I don't think we're at the point yet where we know how much any of those things are going to be used. We know the problem, but how people are going to react is not clear yet. People in NYCHA, we think within a handful of days, maybe the end of the weekend, beginning of next week, virtually everyone, it may be 1 or 2 buildings, no, because they've had real damage. But we think we'll be able to get electricity, hot water, heat into all of the NYCHA buildings, and they won't have to be moved. And that's a group that, a lot of them have young kids. They're not just retirees, they're younger people and have to go to jobs and that sort of thing. And so if they have their apartment available and in a ways that they can continue to function and live, that will be one less thing we have to worry about. Yes, Miss?
FEMA right now has closed all of its emergency centers, not just in the Rockaways, but also all the way up to Staten Island. They're telling us that it's a life-threatening situation for their staff. If they say that's the case, why not evacuate more people?
We do not believe that it's necessary to evacuate people. We did evacuate, as I said before, a handful of seniors' homes last night because those people were particularly fragile. And if power failed, then they really would be suffering from hypothermia or worse. But for the average person, we don't expect it'll be colder, it'll be windier, but we don't expect, or the forecast is not for any material flooding. And when you move people, it's not quite so simple. It takes a lot of resources, and it's dangerous for some people. They're better off in their homes. And I think the last answer to your question is you have to be very careful in terms of when you recommend evacuation, because if people think that you're a crying wolf, the next time when it's really a serious threat, they might not do it. As it is, we think something like 50% of the people never really evacuated, even though there was a mandatory order. Yes, sir.
I wondered how the police department sort of managed to reinvent itself in the immediate aftermath, sort of on the fly, immediate aftermath of Hurricane Sandy, to do things like provide lights on street corners, direct traffic by flashlight, and provide security in gas stations, and sort of what lessons were taken from that experience to this current storm and the next storm.
Well, and I'll say this in front of the commissioner. Number one, this is a department that is phenomenally well led from the top to the bottom, well equipped, well trained, and they're trained. If you think about what police officers do, every day they face different situations, and with time they learn how to deal with things that you and I never thought about and couldn't possibly have trained them for. They have an enormous pride. This is the best police department in the world, and so they want to help. Now, they don't always make the right decision every time, but they're very innovative, and they're out there. They may talk to their sergeant. Sergeant says, go there, this is the mission, but then they're out there, and they're by themselves, and they have to see something and react, and we are well served by this police department. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Mayor, just wonder if you can give us any more detail about the Queens Midtown Tunnel, whether they're pumping it out.
They were pumping it. I think you have to talk to Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority. I guess that's one of their tunnels. My understanding was that the Hugh Carey Brooklyn Battery Tunnel will take much longer, but that they were getting reasonably close. Does that mean today, tomorrow, Friday, Monday? But that kind of time frame for the Midtown Tunnel, that they did not think there was much damage. They have to clean it because it's covered with oil and things like that inside, but they're going to, yes, no.
I was wondering if we could ask you about the presidential race.
We'll come back to that, yes.
On your pack, how do you think it did last night?
Let's come back to that. We're trying to talk about people's lives here. Anything else in the storm? Yes, Miss.
What kind of storm that you need salt for, and if so, is the sanitation department prepared?
It's another sure, they're prepared, but it takes away from the other things they're trying to do. Keep in mind also, the sanitation workers have been working 12-hour shifts 7 days a week for an awful long time. And when that happens, you make mistakes, and it's more dangerous. You don't react as quickly, and you start to get worried, and you want them to stop periodically and get some rest. Otherwise, you have worse situations. Yes, I'm sorry.
Do you have any estimate of the number of people who either normally live in or are still in the areas where the police were going around saying it would be wise to leave?
It's conceivable it's 20 or 30,000 people, a number like that. The problem is you're not sure whether they're still there or have left. We did, in going through 2,000 houses yesterday and today in the Rockaways and on Staten Island and I think Breezy Point as well, found out of the 2,000 houses, 50% no answer when they banged on the door, assumed they were not home. And out of that 50%, half had serious damage to their electrical panel. But whether that is scalable up, who knows? That's one of the reasons we think that, half people left, yes.
Sorry, just getting this in. We're hearing that response teams, people who are going into devastated areas to bring supplies, are now being turned away. How serious is evacuation suggested?
We do not think that we should evacuate people, with the exception of we've recommended Breezy Point, I think, and a couple of other low-lying areas, go back and look at my list, that they should leave voluntarily. But we've not ordered a mandatory evacuation based on the severity of the storm. And you've got to be very careful that if they come back, if they leave and come back and say, oh, no damage or anything, the next time they're not going to leave. And that's always one of the balances. You can always err on the side of safety, but when you do, the consequences of that are that people don't pay attention. Yes, Miss, what was your, oh, wait, I'm sorry, on the storm?
We've asked the Department of Buildings to look at feasibilities to make your buildings more robust against storm surges.
I couldn't hear the question, sorry.
We've been asking the Department of Buildings to look at ways of making your housing stock more robust against storm surges. Yeah,
look, we're not the first ones to suffer a storm, flood from the ocean. We always are working, and we will certainly do that. You just got to remember that since America was discovered, from Florida to Maine, people have been building housing right on the water. It's a very attractive place. It also has its risks. And whenever there is a big storm, people say nobody's ever going to build there again. And history shows that a couple of years later, you've got a lot of new housing in the same spot. I think a lot of the programs that the Army Corps of Engineers have tried of sand and berms and jetties, in some places they've worked, but in a lot of other places they've not. And that is reflected in the fact that nobody will write flood insurance other than the federal government, because it's just the likelihood of it happening again is great. Now, whether or not the frequency of storms that cause this is going up, only history will tell, but I can tell you we never had to evacuate Zone A before, and we've done it twice now within a year, slightly over a year. And the temperatures of the oceans are, that's the one thing you can measure. They are warmer on average by a degree. How you can have an argument about, or why you can have an argument about, but when the oceans are warmer, these storms become more severe and the weather patterns change. So you would expect to have big areas of droughts, which we did throughout the whole country, and more severe storms with more water in them and higher winds. And that's what, in fact, we have. It's the winds that give the surge.
In light of that, have you given any thought, and I know it's not your decision alone, to some sort of tidal system like London has?
London has a small river that they put a barrier on. We have an enormous harbor, but the real damage is we have an extensive shoreline, South Beach, south side of Staten Island and the Rockaways. That's the Atlantic Ocean. I don't think anybody suggests seriously that you could build a barrier from Florida to Maine to hold back the ocean. As a matter of fact, the last guy who tried to hold back the tides made himself very famous in literature. Any other questions on on what you should do? What's going on outside now makes it more uncomfortable and more dangerous, although it's certainly danger of limbs coming down, of cars skidding. So treat this like you would any storm. The real sad part is it's coming on top of our efforts to recover from Sandy. Yes, Miss, I'll take one or two questions. Sure,
I wanted to get your response to President Obama's win last night, and specifically whether you think your endorsement played any role in that, and also just your assessment of your super PAC spending.
You'll have to ask the administration whether they think that my endorsement mattered. I know of one person who sent me an email saying he changed his mind based on my endorsement, so I got him one vote. I have no idea. I expressed myself. I said what I thought. I thought both were decent men and both had values where they could make contributions to our country. But Obama's views on things that I care about, climate change and choice and gay marriage and guns, was closer to my views than Mitt Romney's current views are, although I did point out that when he was back in Massachusetts, his views did seem to be much more in sync with mine. And in terms of the PAC, I've tried to support those candidates who support the things, try to make America better in the ways that I think it should be. Get guns out of the hands of criminals, improve public education. We supported through the PAC I think all 4 of the ballot initiatives on gay marriage, and all 4 of them passed, which I was pleased to. I don't think it's the government's business who you should marry. Miss, you had a question?
She is.
Okay, sir. Last question then.
Do you think early voting might help the Board of Elections prevent the crush every 4 years of these long lines?
I think early voting would reduce to some extent the crowds, but if you look, turnout was, I think, I saw a story saying turnout was not much greater than it was the last time, even though the lines were terrible. I waited 45 minutes. It was fun to talk to people, and it wasn't the worst thing that ever happened in my life, and I was happy to spend 45 minutes. If that's all I had to do to have the right to vote, it's well worth it. But there's no reason to have a system like we have, administered like we have it. And the system is about as poorly designed a system. As I said yesterday, somebody said to me, is this the third world? You don't get into an elevator that isn't controlled by a computer. You don't get in an automobile that isn't controlled by a computer. You don't get into an airplane that isn't controlled by a computer. Computers do everything, and yet we've gone to a paper system. We used to have a system where nobody could look over your shoulder. Now everybody can look over your shoulder. And the chaos of going back and forth, and nobody knew where they were to go, and you had to go over here first to get something. Then you had to go over there to get a booth. Then you had to go over there to the scanner. It was just a nightmare, and and I think the real answer here is we should reform this system. It should not be 2 parties and county leaders picking their buddies to supervise the basis of our citizenship, the ability to pick your leaders.
You've been saying this for years. Do you see any movement in this direction?
Maybe we've gotten to the point where you've got to the breaking point. I don't know. But I think here we have the Board of Elections saying that they don't think that they can handle a mayoral primary and a runoff in the time between a September primary and a November election. So they want to change the whole dynamics of how we pick our leaders just to accommodate their schedules. That is about as bad an idea. It is such a distortion of what our values are. I can't think of anything more ridiculous. The elections and the primaries in September and a general election in November is tradition. People have built their campaigns around it. The public wants a chance to listen to people and make their decisions, and we certainly shouldn't change it to accommodate a system. What we've got to do is the people running the Board of Elections, and there's basically nobody running it. They've gone 2 years and can't even agree on an executive director. There's 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats picked by their county leaders. The public has no say in this, and over a third of the public is not in either of those 2 parties, and they don't even have poll workers there. And then they hire people who are nice people who are trying hard, but we don't have a system for the 21st century. I think that's clear, and it's just a disgrace. Our last question, because you look like you're going to jump out of your seat.
Rich Land, WCBS. Mr. Mayor, in his victory speech last night, the president talked about speaking to Mr. Romney about bipartisanship. Do you have any hope that the gridlock will be broken in Washington, or do you think that's unrealistic?
No, I think on some things the public will demand, and the partisanship and the self-serving unwillingness to come together will be trumped by that, not in everything. And partisanship is unfortunately part of our system. There'll always be some of that. But I think that the public has spoken. I thought I didn't stay up. When it was obvious when the president was declared the winner by one of the networks, I went home and went to bed. I had to get up early this morning, but I thought what I read, he said, and Governor Romney said was, let's come together and take this country forward, and we can have another competition for presidency 4 years from now. But now is the time to focus on the needs of our society. There aren't enough jobs. There's too many murders with guns. We're driving business away with an immigration policy. We've got a healthcare system that's going to bankrupt us. We've got a fiscal policy that's giving us deficits that are not sustainable. You can go right down the list. There are a lot of things to do, and I hope Congress and the White House work together across party lines to do what's right for the American public. Thank you.